Ray Stewart, State Senator in District 2 and Senate Republican leader. We've had a couple of cancellations of these in the last couple of weeks because of all the snowstorms, so it's good to see you all, and thanks for being here today. As we've done in our past press conferences, our weekly rundowns, we pick a caucus priority and go through what we think some policy solutions might be to whatever the issue is, and then open it up for Q&A about that at the end, as well as general Q&A that we can do about any subjects. And given the fact that it's been a couple weeks, I'm sure there's probably a lot of ground to cover there, so we'll try to save some time at the end as well. So today's issue is going to be school safety and student safety in the state of Maine, particularly as it relates to our public schools. I'm going to turn it over here in a couple minutes to a couple of my colleagues, Senator Moore, who's our lead on the Health and Human Services Committee, and she's going to talk about mental health in public schools. And then I'm also going to turn it over afterwards to Senator Jim Libby, who's going to talk as our lead on the Education Committee about what's happening with the Department of Education and the direction that we think as Republicans we ought to be heading in. Before I do that, though, I want to outline a couple of ideas that we have had as a caucus in light of the events that have occurred across the country, and unfortunately, we've not had to experience one of those in Maine involving any sort of mass casualty event or a school shooting incident, but there have been times when we've gotten kind of close. And in an effort to try to avoid any sort of catastrophe and crisis and a scenario where unfortunately folks might have to encounter at some point, we have a couple of ideas that we want to move forward today. And you'll see some of these reflected in legislation that's sponsored by members of our caucus, as well as in talks around the budget. The first is to conduct an actual forensic audit and do a gap assessment of where we are from an infrastructure standpoint in the state of Maine as it relates to school safety. What sort of technologies exist and what sort of technologies could we incorporate into our public schools as we look to either construct new schools or refurbish existing infrastructure to make sure that our students and our teachers are protected with the best technology that's out there, and make sure that the state is paying its share of that as well. Not to just pass a mandate on to local districts, but actually spend the money because it's a priority to keep these folks safe, and do so, again, through the budgeting process in a way that makes sense, that captures the need to balance costs with actual legitimate safety concerns that we're seeing. And I think there's a myriad of examples that we've seen recently in the last couple of years of times when that technology either didn't exist or wasn't utilized at all and led to unfortunate outcomes. We can get ahead of that in the state of Maine, and we should be pushing for that. One such technology, and there's a bill coming up actually later this afternoon in the Education Committee about interlocking doors, so-called dead man's doors, where if a person is carrying a weapon and they walk through one set of doors at a public school, that then triggers the second set to lock so that they can't advance any further until somebody's assessed the situation and gone out and said, okay, well, that person's just moving a photocopier, that's not a gun, they can move forward, or alternatively, that person doesn't belong here, we're not sure what's going on, let's get some other folks involved and verify that they should actually be admitted into the school before they can proceed any further, and we'll lock them there. I think that that's one example of what we need to do in terms of creative thinking. The world is a changing place. Unfortunately, there is real evil out there, and we need to stay ahead of it. And I think what we need to be doing is looking at the professionals and the experts across our state and leaning on them for guidance as to how to best do that. And so one idea that we have is to create a task force that's directly associated with that pulls in experts and not bureaucrats, folks who are professionals out in the field in different fields like mental health, public safety, and education, to be able to help with that assessment and help make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve and preventing these threats, both internal and external, in our public schools. And in particular, and the last point I want to make too, is that we need to be making sure that our rural districts in particular are not falling behind for a lack of resources. And that's something that I think historically when you have larger school districts, they receive more funds from the state as a function of the school funding formula. It can't be the case that schools in, for instance, Aroostook or Washington County are not as secure as schools in Cumberland County simply because they don't have the resources. Those kids matter just as much, those teachers matter just as much, and we need to be making sure that whatever model we put forward is one that's going to work across all of Maine. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Moore for her segment, and we'll be back for Q&A at the end.
Thank you, Senator. So student mental health is definitely a concern, and we all know that to be a fact. Recent survey results released by the US CDC is alarming, especially for our female students here in Maine. Let me share some of the statistics. For the first time, the percentage of girls who felt persistently sad and hopeless, a marker for depressive symptoms, increased substantially in 2021 from 2011 to nearly 3 in 5. 3 in 5, and we know the pandemic did not help the situation any at all. More than 1 in 4 girls reported they seriously considered attempting suicide in 2021, up significantly from 2011. More than 1 in 10 girls reported they attempted suicide in 2021, also increasing significantly over the decade. And alcohol use is also higher among girls than boys. Young people in the United States and here in Maine are collectively experiencing a level of distress that calls for action. While the primary goal of schools is academic learning, they also play a major role in shaping mental, physical, and social growth. However, one cannot be sacrificed for the other, and both goals must be rooted within the family structure, which Senator Libby will be discussing in a bit. Instead, our challenge is to offer the resources that are needed to achieve academic excellence and address the levels of mental anguish we're seeing among our students, especially our young girls. These efforts should center around 3 primary areas that are both family-centric and school-centric. Number 1, increase the sense of family and community. Effective programs includes approaches like providing safe and trusted adults, such as mentors or trained teachers, and connecting the teens to their peers and communities through clubs and community outreach. In consultation with parents and families, these programs help kids know they matter and are not alone. Secondly, the increasing access to much-needed health services, including mental health and substance use prevention services, whether provided on-site or through connected youth and families to community-based sources of care. However, my goal is to move to school-based health centers as a centralized source for all things health that would work in conjunction with families and parents. This includes substance use abuse intervention. Implementing quality health education is number 3, and that is medically accurate, developmentally appropriate, and grounded in science to help prevent youth violence, reduce your mental health challenges, and provide the educational resources needed in our rural areas to prevent substance use, any substance, before it starts. No matter what we do through our schools, though, it has to start with family. So this time I'd like to invite Senator Libby up to speak.
Good afternoon. Maine has been modeling in the Department of Education a relatively new approach called the whole child framework. And this has come from some research and recommendations from around the country. I think it looks like most of it emanated in the state of Ohio. And the modeling is important. So today I brought with me, I don't have a copy to hand out to you, but it's available on the Ohio State website, a copy of the whole child framework model. And while Republicans see some advantages to this, there's clearly some disadvantages as well. The first thing, obviously, that the simplest matter is, where is the family in all this? And if you look at the Ohio framework, it's pretty interesting. We've got the child in the center, safe, healthy, challenged, supported, and engaged. And then the processes that intervene and help with that include school safety, the physical environment, school climate and culture, staff wellness, self-care, community involvement, family engagement, behavioral services, health services, school and child nutrition, social emotional learning, health education, and physical education. So, and then the family is circled around the outside, and this is Ohio's model. So these are the interventions that they have modeled and they work and want to provide to their schools. When you go to Maine's model, this is what it looks like. Maine's model, the first thing that you'll notice about it, and I think this is startling and unfortunately it's kind of typical of what I'm seeing in the education committee, the family is not even mentioned. It's not mentioned. And there is this belief by some that the family's inclusion is apparently something less than the expertise that others can provide, and in particular DOE. And I can't really say that I agree with that. And so they've got pretty much the same elements of the model: a healthy, safe, engaged, supported, challenged, and prepared student. And those are all important, those structures. And it says through investments in structures, people, systems, and practices. So where those systems and practices are being introduced in Maine is through the governor's budget and through the DOE budget. And you can see it reflected in where the money is going and the positions that are being created in the DOE. So it's ever so important to understand that these interventions take place during the school day. So if there is a problem with the school climate or the culture, then there should be an intervention. There should be ongoing efforts by student-led teams and other things. We're concerned about some of that. Now, these approaches are important, but there are times when the school, if it is going to serve as a one-stop shop, there are times when the school can be utilized for these sorts of things, not necessarily during the school day. So we have a great system in the state of extracurriculars after school. I know in my district we have before and after care, and I've been very busy with the Maine Children's Caucus. We've been talking to people about the importance of utilizing the schools and their facilities in that way. There are definitely some safety issues, the physical building safety issues that need to be addressed when you use a building in that way, and there are people coming in and out. So that's what a lot of people in our caucus feel that we should be laser focused on, are the actual processes that occur during the day to keep children physically safe. And then the emotional support can come later. So some of them, when I come later, I mean later after the school bell rings. So some of the problems that we've had is that are clear. Let's say that you are a child with autism, you're on the spectrum, and you've been identified, you need services. It's common knowledge that there's up to a 1-year wait for those services. Those are called early intervention services. Ladies and gentlemen, that's where the money should go. The money should go toward trying to repair the delivery of services and add to services in rural areas where those services don't even exist in some cases, or you have to really reach out for them over long distances, for example. So we have concerns about, first, the family first priority. I think we believe that the family should be at the center making the decisions. We also think that most students come prepared to learn. What we're hearing from the DOE right now is we have to make sure that students come prepared to learn. Yes, the ones that aren't. But those intervention strategies should be targeted. If you intervene across the entire curriculum during the school day, there'll be more interruptions, less learning, and most importantly, we'll continue to get back test scores like we've been getting lately that drop further and further and further below the national average instead of above it where we were just a decade ago. It's something to be concerned about. And the last thing I want to address is that obviously the federal government has come down hard on the DOE. I think the commissioner had delivered an impassioned speech last week. It came with, some mixed results, but certainly she cares, and she's working at delivering the goods. But the problem is, we don't have that criterion reference-based test to deliver yet. We haven't seen it. We need to see it. What we've been delivering lately, as you know, is the NUIA. The NUIA is a great test, but to describe it simply, it's kind of a bell curve test. It's not reference to learning results or even national standards. It's just ever so critical that we get back to that point. Will what the department generates in terms of standardized testing, will it look like the main learning results, and will it achieve those results? I hate to be asking that question. I think we need to know the answer to that question now. We need to be on top of this. It's a great concern. Now, none of us up here want to just teach to the test and have another test and have another test, but there is a place for standardized testing. And when it's carried out properly in the schools, students learn from it, and especially when it's criterion-based. So we need to move quickly back. Now, some states have successfully achieved, just a couple of states have successfully achieved a waiver, and they haven't been slapped on the hand like Maine. I'm not saying that we should have done that, and I do think our response should be strong and measured, and I do think the commissioner is trying to do that, but we're in a vulnerable position right now because we're not fully prepared where we need to be. And I think we're spending an awful lot of time on issues like social emotional learning, climate and culture. Those are important, but let's not overemphasize those at the risk of not achieving other goals. So that's my presentation today.
Thank you, Trey. Okay, happy to answer any questions anybody has. We can either cover, we've got about 5-ish minutes or so. We can cover this topic or any others that you folks have.
Different topic, budget discussions, and we're getting closer to the point where things are starting to pick up. When are we going to see, Republicans have talked about the tax cuts. When are we going to see a concrete plan from Republicans about how to go forward on that?
Well, I mean, as you know, Kevin, right, the tax cuts are a function of how much money is available. I think what we need to first be drilling into is how much waste is there in this budget. I submit that that's fairly substantial, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. That is going to directly impact how much of a tax cut we can expect to see in the next budget. But before we can even get to that point, the other side has to be willing to negotiate there, and to this point we have not yet heard any sort of confirmation that they're even willing to entertain that idea at all. And so the people of Maine should be very aware of that we have the biggest budget in the history of the state, over $10 billion, $10.5 billion in terms of revenues, and yet the plan is to spend every nickel as it sits right now. We're meeting with the governor later this afternoon to hopefully be able to flesh out if there is any desire to do anything there in terms of a tax cut. But as of right now, I don't have a good answer for you in terms of what they're interested in exploring.
Are you part of your appropriations committee members having those conversations with their Democratic colleagues? Are you floating any ideas about what you would like to see? Something more concrete, that way they have something to work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been pretty transparent for a long time that Republicans are interested in lowering our tax burden as much as we possibly can for Maine people. I think there's particular interest amongst Republicans to do something either in terms of an income tax cut or a sales tax cut. Those are things that we floated. The committee, though, to get to your question specifically, they're not even done their report backs yet. And that's a function of this hurry up pace that the other side's been doing, because we're concerned that they're going to ram a majority budget through that isn't going to have any sort of tax cut at all, and is only going to have the Democrat priorities included in it. So until we get to that point, there's not a lot of negotiation going on.
how big of a concern is that in your eyes that they're going to push the majority budget? Are you hearing that from them, or?
All signs point to that, which is unfortunate. I think if that does happen, I've said this to others, and I'll say it again, that would be a tremendous blow to the institution that is the legislature and the process that we are supposed to be utilizing here in the state of Maine. You know, we've got probably 8-10 days here before things get to crunch time, and they run out of time to do that. But you know, again, I think there's a reason that the governor has called a meeting just before the window closes to see what, you know, palatability there is for the other side to negotiate with us. And we're willing to negotiate. I want to be crystal clear about that. We've got all kinds of options. You've heard about a number of them right here in these briefings week after week ever since January when we first started this process, and even some here today. But if, you know, we're not going to get anywhere in this if they just hit the button on a majority budget.
Switching gears back to mental health and the schools, do you guys have any proposals for recruitment? I understand there was a statement made, there's a 1-year wait for early intervention services. Is that connected to recruitment, or could you kind of go into that a bit?
To clarify your question, you mean recruitment as in the workers on,
yes,
on the provider side, right? The theme, I'll hand it over to Mary Ann here in a minute, but I think the theme you're going to hear across all areas of healthcare providers are that, one, Main care reimbursement is too low for things that matter a lot. And we don't provide enough resources on that front for folks to make the dollars work out in the private sector where they're trying to actually go out and do this work. But, you know, two, I think you've got a tremendous amount of people that are on the sidelines right now that can and should be working, and pre-COVID were working. And now the biggest competition is actually with the government for whether or not they're going to go out and do the work that's critical and has to get done because folks are relying on them to do that work. Feel free to jump in.
Thank you. Workforce is, of course, a very, very serious situation, and every public hearing that we have on any of the bills, that's what we hear, shortage of workforce. One of the things that we did last term is that we made sure that we had a very, very good rate reform program in place, and we've been going right through it and really working it, and that's what we're hoping. We're going to be able to fix those reimbursement rates that were extremely low, and that way it will enable these businesses to be able to hire the folks to do that. We did include those in the budget. We have line items for all of those that have come up and have been reviewed, and it was a unanimous coming out of committee. That was our recommendation to the Appropriations Committee, that we do that funding. We've got to be meticulous about making sure that we're funding them and giving them the resources that are desperately needed in the field. Thank you. Sure.
Trey, I'll be the one who asks it, but former President Trump could be indicted today or tomorrow. You know, as one of the state's top Republicans, do you think it's good for the party or the country?
Frankly, Mike, I don't know enough about what the circumstances are there. I try to stay focused on Maine politics and what we can do here to improve the state of Maine. You know, if it happens, it's somebody else's problem to go figure out. But, you know, we're laser focused right now. We got a lot on our plate and sessions in full swing. So, good time for another question.
I mean, I'll go on the budget angle. I mean, I talked with Representative Falkingham, and he sort of expressed a general position that the caucus wants something in the $9.9 billion region with some sort of tax cut. Are you guys basically aligned with that ask? I mean, you guys are going to have to come to an agreement on something quickly if you're going to give the Democrats, right, like, you know, a reason to negotiate with you with this deadline coming, right? So that might be you could call it a pretext or any reason, but you know, they're gonna make a move one way or the other soon. So
yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, right? The other side has to make the move, whether they're going to include us in the process or not. I actually think we've put out a number of initiatives that provide angles to negotiate on, and frankly, beyond that tax cut, right? And you've heard them week after week and here when we've talked about these different ideas. You know, the problem is that if we get down to one thing and then that falls apart, I don't want us to be left, you know, in a situation where there's no other way for the other side to go. I think we've done a good job of being reasonable and articulating our positions and our priorities throughout the session so far. I don't see any reason why that trend would change now, but the other side has to be willing to give and take, right? I mean, that's a sign of any good negotiation. And so we've got all kinds of options that we can play with. We're not limiting it to just one. I think the House is really, really interested in that one. But certainly we are, but that is one of many that we're interested in. So,
Thank you.
okay, thanks everybody. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.